Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. Now this upcoming weekend is going to be a pretty significant one because we finally have the Age of Overlord sneak peek here. This is looking like an absolutely game-changing set, and now that we know all of the rarities of all the different cards, I think it's pretty easy to see why so many players are hyped for the set. Now that being said, it's also important for us not to go too crazy with things and still try to be rational when we're looking at both cards from the set itself as well as cards that are affected by this set's release so that we're not overspending on things unnecessarily. Let's get started. Alright, now kicking things off, we're looking at SP Little Knight. So I think that this is pretty clearly the best card in the entire set. A generic Link 2 monster that basically every single extra deck is going to be running at least one copy of. I can definitely see this card as being something that everyone is looking to use, right? So almost every deck goes into its extra deck every turn, so having access to this free banish is really amazing. It's basically two forms of disruption in a generic Link 2 monster. Now, as far as this card's price goes, it should be no surprise that all of the sites doing pre-sales and such have this as being the most expensive card in the set, with the cheaper ones being around $80 US, while the most expensive end is around $110 to $115. It's pretty easy to write this off as just being an early sneak peek price, right? Since I think it's pretty in line with what we expect to see at the top end of a lot of sets. However, I could actually see things going either way with this card, where either it stays expensive or it comes down in price to a much more reasonable level. Now, on one hand, we do see a lot of chase cards come down to around that $50 range, especially when they're really overhyped going into the set's release, but then the card doesn't perform. So if SP Little Knight ends up not seeing much play here, it could end up going that route. On top of that, SP is just a one-of, unlike something like Talents or Thrust or Prosperity, which are played in multiples, those also being core set secret rares. However, we can't disregard how important these extra deck staples are, as we've seen with cards like Appaloosa and Access Code Talker go up well over the $100 mark in the past. Either way, I am just going to recommend picking up a card like this early on and then keeping it for yourself to use. I think that at the end of the day, right, regardless of if it's like $50 or $100, we've all taken L's on card purchases before, so it's definitely possible that the card's price will go down. However, this card is so staple, since it's a new card from a new set that isn't going to be reprinted for quite some time. If you just go ahead, pick up the card now, even if you do pay a little bit more or the card's price does come down in a little bit, you'll get a lot of use out of the card over the next couple of years anyways, and you'll ultimately end up saving yourself a lot of hassle. On to the next one, I want to look at Bellstar the Black Witch. So of course the Snake Eye engine is probably the most highly anticipated engine to come out of Age of Overlord. Now over in the OCG, it is most well known for helping to push Rescue Ace to the top of the format, being able to summon Hydrant out of the deck while also turning dead cards into additional resources. However, we also have other decks such as Fire Kings and Infernoids that will be looking to use the engine for its ability to summon that level 1 fire monster out of the deck. Now aside from that though, it'll be interesting to see if any other decks are going to be able to make use of the engine, or if its application will be somewhat limited here in the TCG. Now, Bellstar is an important card for the engine, setting a Sinful Spoils out of the deck on its summon, and also being a body that can be easily summoned back to the field over and over again to help maintain board presence. However, it is typically played just at 1, sometimes at 2 if you do really want to lean on the engine a little bit. That being said, the pre-sale prices for this card seem a little bit high. They're $25 on the low end, $50 on the high end, and personally, I feel like anything over $20 is just too much to pay for this card. In a set that is as loaded as Age of Overlord is, there's going to be a lot of players that are looking at other cards that are valuable, so the price distribution should push this card's price lower as more and more of the sets gets opened. Now, if we look back at Power of the Elements, for example, even though Kaleido Heart was a great card for Tearlaments and an important extra deck option, it was just a one-of there as well, and it was never really a particularly expensive card after the set became widely distributed. Now that being said, if you can, I would hold off on getting Bellstar too early. Wait for the set to become widely available and you'll be able to get it for between $10 and $20, because as much as the engine is really strong, this card is just a one-of and it's not going to be used in absolutely every deck, so the price should cool off rather quickly. Now, another piece of the Diabellstar engine here, it is Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils. So this card really does feel like the card that just makes the engine so broken. It's a quick play spell card that adds a Diabellstar monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and then during your main phase you can banish it from your graveyard, take another Sinful Spoils spell or trap with a different name from your graveyard or banish pile, put that back to the bottom of your deck, and then draw a card. So for some reason, this is a quick play spell, allowing you to activate it during the draw phase to play around Joel and Lockbird, and on top of that, you can use each of its effects once per turn. So this is definitely the second best card to come out of the set, and that's definitely reflected in the presale prices that we're seeing right now as well. But to be honest, I do see the card's price cooling down after the set comes out. Right now, our presale range is between $65 and $80 roughly, which once again is probably consistent with our usual presale prices that we see, but I think it is high compared to where the price will ultimately be once the set officially drops. Now, as strong as the engine is, on the set's release, it looks like it'll only be really used by the Rescue Ace strategy, and Rescue Ace still has to compete with decks like Tearlament, Pearly, and Unchained going into this upcoming format. That being said, my early expectation is that this card is going to go down to around the $40 to $45 mark. I think that the best comparison I can come up with is Nadir Servant, a 3-of searcher for a very strong engine, but where the engine is only limited to certain decks, and also where the engine is competing with staple cards from the same set in terms of price, since Nadir Servant was competing with Forbidden Droplets and Triple Tactics Talent. Now that being said, I could see a world where Seeker of Sinful Spoils is more expensive. If Rescue Ace Diabellstar is like a tier 0.5 strategy where it just dominates everything else, then yeah, I could see this card being justified at like $70 to $80. But for now, and for while you guys are at your sneak peeks this upcoming weekend, if possible, I would hold off on picking up this card for now and expect to see the card's price cool off within the next couple of weeks. Okay, so we're moving on to a few existing cards here, but these cards are still related to the format coming in after Age of Overlord, the first being Phantom Knights of Silent Boots. So this card is a really useful piece of the Phantom Knight deck. It's a free extender that you can special summon from hand if you control a Phantom Knight monster, and you can banish it from your graveyard to search for a Phantom Knight spell or trap card. Now you're generally searching for either Fogblade or Wings, each of which is able to function as an extender for the strategy. The reason we're looking at Boots here is that Phantom Knights are getting a bit of attention as a deck that could be strong after Age of Overlord gives us the new Horus cards. I've seen several people talking about running Phantom Knight and Horus cards together with the Adventurer token engine, and it certainly seems interesting, especially given that we've already seen Phantom Knight Adventurer as a relatively strong deck in the past. As of right now, it's not like a proven strategy or anything, since I think the Adventurer token cards have been hit harder in the OCG than they have in the TCG, so it isn't really able to function over there, but I'm sure we will find out after the set is officially released here. Fortunately, Silent Boots has a few different low rarity printings, including the Mega Rare and a couple of common versions, so just finding a copy of the card should be relatively easy. However, the secret rares are the max rarity printing, so those are up to around $5 per copy now. Definitely a card to own at least a set of the commons for, but if you're someone who wants to own the higher rarity versions of cards or matching sets, you might want to consider picking up the entire Phantom Knight engine as secret rares, since a lot of the pieces have gotten random rarity bumps over the last several years. Up next, we're looking at Rock of the Vanquisher. So this is a Link 1 card that is really important for the Vanquished Soul deck. In fact, it is something that the deck runs 3 copies of 100% of the time. This card is actually kind of like the heart and soul of the deck, allowing you to, during your main phase, either add a Vanquished Soul monster from your graveyard back to your hand, or special summon a Vanquished Soul monster from your hand, and either of these is a quick effect. Now, in a deck that otherwise struggles to put too many bodies onto the field, having access to Rock on board is a necessity. So I don't know how I feel about Vanquished Soul in general right now. Like, on one hand, Talents and Thrust seem like they are in absolutely everyone's deck, and since Rock has to use its effect during the main phase, you're basically just asking to run into a huge problem and potentially getting blown out. At the same time though, Vanquished Soul was able to make the finals at YCS Dortmund, just losing to Rika Sanavalon in the finals, and the deck does get stronger with Jiaolong coming out as well, a 3-of fire monster that can search for another Vanquished Soul card while it's on the field. It's hard to say for right now, especially since the card is confirmed to be getting an Ultimate Rare upgrade in OTS Tournament Pack 24, so even though the deck is getting stronger and should see more demand, people know that the Ultra just isn't max rarity, so people are holding out and will just look to pick up the ultis when they come out in a few months. Right now, the card is just ever so slightly trending upwards. It was at around $15, it's currently around $17 to $18, and looks like it's going to be trending up towards $20 soon. I got my set of Vanquish Soul stuff pretty early on, so I'm probably just going to keep mine, but I feel like unless you're going to play Vanquish Soul for yourself, you probably want to stay away from this card for now. Okay, so here's a key card from the deck that doesn't get any support in Age of Overlord, and that just might be the problem. It's Abomination's Prison. So Unchained has stepped up as being arguably the best deck of the last couple of months, taking a lot of event tops and wins. Abomination's Prison is a natural 3-up for the deck that is probably one of the best search cards for an archetype ever printed. Not only does it search for any card from the archetype, not just a monster or just a spell or trap, but also it can be destroyed to special summon an Unchained monster from the deck, which is like the gimmick of the entire archetype, and you can use each effect once per turn. Now, as good as Unchained has been, I think a lot of players are speculating that the deck just isn't going to be as good after the release of Age of Overlord. Rescue Ace is clearly looking like the best deck, and the deck has access to Abyss Dweller, which is going to be a standard opening play because of how it can shut down either Unchained or Tearlaments. On top of that, it just feels like every other deck in the game got some new tools, while Unchained is pretty much going to remain completely the same. Because of that, we are starting to see players sell off their Unchained cards. Abomination's Prison is a card that was at least $30 for either copy before. I think it was $40 for the Secret Rare, but right now on TCG Player, we are seeing the Ultras down at $20 and the Secret Rare copies down at $25. A pretty significant fall off for a card and a deck that wasn't hit by the ban list at all. Only time is going to tell us what actually happens to Unchained. Personally, I really enjoy the deck, but it's also been really frustrating to run into Dweller back when I was playing Tearlaments and just not being able to play the game at all, so we're going to have to wait and see what the community decides in the first couple of events after Age of Overlord. And finally, the last card I want to acknowledge here is Triple Tactics Thrust. We did talk about this card, I believe, about a month ago, and we already thought that this card was pretty pricey back then, but it turns out that the card had room to go up in price even more. Thrust is a crazy card, as if your opponent just activated a monster effect this turn, it searches you any normal spell or trap from your deck. If your opponent controls a monster, you can add that card to your hand, so you could activate like a Talons, a Lightning Storm, and Evenly Matched, but even if your opponent doesn't have one on the field, they just ashed you or jolled you or did something, you can still set something like a Dimensional Barrier from your deck, which is a potential blowout card as well. So with only 2 printings, we have seen Thrust go up in price across the board. The secrets were around $70, they're now up at just under $100 each, and then with the ultimate rares, they were at $100, they're now up even more to between $130 to $135, which is really crazy. In all honesty, I don't see this card going down anytime soon. It theoretically won't be reprinted until next year's tins, unless it randomly gets included in something like Rarity Collection, and I don't see how being able to search for any normal spell or trap in the game could ever be considered bad, so I don't know why this card's price would go down before then. The only thing I'm not sure of at this point is how did this card ever end up as low as $70 in the first place? I feel like even looking ahead to next year's Nationals, right, you're probably going to need to play at least like 2 copies of Thrust, so if you don't have it, see if you can pick them up locally to get them any cheaper, but still expect to pay at least $90 per copy. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's Market Watch. Good luck to all of you participating at your sneak peeks this upcoming weekend. I know I will be aiming to get the Age of Overlord sneak peek mat. It looks really, really nice. I also want to get an SP and the new Ixies while it's still early. I'll probably want like the Diabellstar engine as well. I mean, like a quarter century rare would be nice, but I'm usually not that lucky enough to pull those. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's episode, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Also, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.